Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is yet another rant video. It is on a article from a website that a good friend of mine, Matt, Ramble Rat for Life, wanted to hear my thoughts on. I saw his video that he did on this article, and it was quite a entertaining watch, and I definitely would recommend it. I'll probably link it in the video description down below if you want to see another take on this. And before I tackle this steaming pile of fucking bullshit, I want to make it so some of you aren't too alarmed by what you see here. This is just something I'm dealing with on and off. It's not really even bothering me right now. It just looks worse than it really is. It's just a skin thing that I'm dealing with, some skin sensitivity. It's kind of fitting though, because I just reading this article, it felt like I was being assaulted and scratched to my core. So it's fitting that it looks like I got attacked by a fucking demon from hell, because that's honestly where a lot of these shitty fucking articles come from. They clearly come from the bowels of hell itself, because they torture me so much. Now, this is an article from a website called ScreenRant. Now, ScreenRant's a website that at one point in time I actually used to use for movie news, but then their standards got incredibly low when it comes to what kind of writers they would hire and what kind of articles they would put up, and they started posting a lot of clickbait, and I was just like, fuck that, I don't want anything to do with that anymore. That's the reason why I stopped following Cinema Blend. I don't know if any of you remember Cinema Blend, or if you still follow Cinema Blend today. Cinema Blend used to be a website that wasn't as full of as much clickbait and absolute terrible just excuses for writing. It wasn't always that way. It actually was a pretty good movie news site. And then their standards dipped to absolutely ridiculous depths, and then I was like, fuck that shit. And then I went to Slash Film, and Slash Film has recently been posting a lot of absolutely awful, atrocious articles too. And I'm just like, is there even a movie news site that I can go to now where I'm not going to run into a steaming pile of fucking feces around each fucking page of the website? Like, jeez. I mean, if you want to see how low and how bad the state of journalism has gotten over the years, just go to any movie news site. Just go to any of them and read multiple articles, and you will see clearly how far things have fallen when it comes to the overall quality of the writing. So this article being absolute dog shit is not shocking, but it's still upsetting, because I actually have a passion for film and I actually care about articles on film sites, I don't know, being written by people who know what the fuck they're talking about, or at the very least have some actual legitimate effort put into them, instead of this fucking shit. So this is an article on ScreenRant called 20 Notoriously Bad 80s Action Movies and 5 So Bad They Were Good. And this is by some guy named Dave Bath, who I've never fucking heard of. Some nobody. Yeah, he has a job writing for this website, but he's probably a freelance writer. He probably doesn't get paid that much. It seems like he just writes a lot of clickbait stuff, a lot of really quick, easy, cut and paste articles that don't really have that much thought put into them. And on one hand, part of me is like, okay, he's doing a job. He probably has a lot on his plate, and he's doing this because he's trying to get his foot in the door in the industry. But on the other hand, I'm like, where is your fucking integrity? I mean, I don't even if I had a job like this, I would have quit it pretty early on if I realized that I was writing clickbait bullshit. I'd be like, that's not what I signed up for. That's not why I decided to join a film website. I want to write about film. I want to do that. And I want to do it in a way that's actually thoughtful and actually passionate. I'm not going to churn out clickbait bullshit. I don't know. Maybe have some fucking integrity. How about that? Find another profession. Find another way to get your content out there. If you're a good enough writer or you're a good enough content creator, you can probably find an audience outside of a website like ScreenRant. And it's not like the ScreenRant and writing on it is really giving you that much of a reach, especially nowadays. I mean, there's only one comment on this article, and it was published in 2019. So let's just go through this bit by bit, or shit by shit, because really it's nothing but shit, so it might as well be just one turd after another. So it starts off with the 80s were a simpler time. Were they really? And also, I hate that's like a really condescending way to sum up the 80s. The 80s were a simpler time. That just sounds like the kind of shit you would say to insult something, not to really talk about it in a light that is unbiased or somewhat objective. Of course, action heroes were still avoiding explosions and spooky bad guys. That's something that will never change. Each year, fans flock to the movies to check out the newest action film. In fact, there isn't a person that doesn't love a good 80s action movie. Of course, Rambo, Mad Max, and Die Hard were some of the best of their decade. Some of the best of the decade, my bad. On the other hand, not all of them were good. As a matter of fact, the 80s had its fair share of bad action movies. Yeah, that's not really saying anything. Every genre and every decade has had its fair share of bad films. Also, there are people who don't love 80s action movies. Those people exist. I don't get it, but those people also exist. To be fair, some were so bad they ended up being good. So, yeah, that is true. But on a little bit of a tangent, the whole so bad it's good thing, that's also been used way too much by some people lately. And in a way that I think doesn't fit. Like, you have films that I think are legitimately good or competent or well-made action movies. A lot of the films on this list, and they're considered to be so bad it's good or guilty pleasures. And I don't understand that mindset one bit. On the other hand, really bad films stayed bad. In fact, they're so bad that they're famous for it. Many actors became stuck in the action hero role. They turned out movie after movie. There were many hits and misses in the 80s. Some of the misses still have fans talking. Of course, it was easier to be an action hero back then. I don't know. I actually think it was harder to be an action hero back then. Nowadays, you can be an action hero if you just do action. We have action heroes who really, in my opinion, are a stretch to be called an action hero. Like, you have people say things like Katniss Everdeen was an action hero at one point, or saying that Rey Skywalker is an action hero, or that kind of stuff. And you get my drift. And or other people saying things like Finn was an action hero from Star Wars, the new trilogy, or Cameron Poe, and it's like, No, they're not really action heroes. It's a sci-fi franchise. I never really saw Luke Skywalker as an action hero, but that's just me personally. But anyway, that's a whole other thing altogether. Fans still love a good bad action movie. The 80s had a few movies that seemed like a flop, however, they were so bad they're good. Okay, how many fucking times are you going to repeat this term, they're so bad they're good? How many fucking times? You can make a drinking movie. Sorry, it's almost like I've already taken multiple shots just reading this shit. You you could make a drinking game out of each and every time this writer repeats certain phrases, and you would be absolutely hammered not even halfway through this article because he's so repetitive. So yeah, they were so bad they're good. They surprised the harshest critics. At the time, they didn't do well, but time has been kind to them. It might be a few films, but fans still love them. Of course, they wish the bad movies would just go away. I mean, bad movies are always going to be there. I don't wish they would just go away, because if they went away entirely, we would have no bar. There would be no part of the bar that we could set when it comes to the lowest tier, the lowest moment on the bar when it comes to quality. So no, I don't wish bad movies would go away. I don't like watching bad movies most of the time, but I'm glad they still exist because the alternative is really bad. It's even worse than the worst bad movie to me. It's time to take a closer look at the action in the 1980s. This isn't even proper fucking grammar. It's time to take a closer look at the action in the 1980s. Do you mean action films or the action genre? Maybe you forgot to put genre in there? Okay, here are the 20 notoriously bad 80s action movies. At 5, so bad they're good. Of course, number 25 is Over the Top, and it's considered to be bad. I'm not going to say Over the Top is a masterpiece, but what I will say is this. It's an enjoyable film for what it is. It's well made, it's well put together, and I don't understand why people think it's a bad film, at least in an objective fashion. Yeah, it's a silly concept, but it's got a good heart to it, and ultimately it works all right. I mean, how many arm wrestling movies have you seen? Not many. And I know some people say, well, that's for a reason. But, you know, a lot of the same people say, well, I give this film credit because it did something different. But they don't do that for Over the Top for some reason. But yeah, you know, it is what it is, but I don't think it's a bad film. Yeah, Stallone admits he could have done things differently. Stallone said a lot of things. That doesn't really mean that the film is bad to me. Sorry. And what he's been saying is that he wished he did it differently in a way where it was more serious. And I don't think that really would work with that film. Over the Top is at its best when it embraces the spectacle, the over the top aspects of the plot. It's a classic bad 80s action movie with heart. Okay, yeah, it has heart. I'm glad you pointed that out, but why is it bad? Like, he even says, like, it's so famous for being bad that it has a bit of a cult following. No, maybe it's so famous and has a cult following because people actually like the movie and they don't think it's a bad film. I don't feel bad for liking Over the Top. I think it's a fun film. I think it's a cool movie. I don't feel guilty about saying that. Then number 24 is Kickboxer, and it has a photo from one of the Kickboxer direct-to-video sequels, like Kickboxer Vengeance or some shit. I hate this too, where these writers are so fucking lazy and so apathetic when it comes to their jobs. They just throw in pictures and other shit that are not even remotely close to the topic they're talking about or the film. Like, it's I mean, really, it took you a little bit to go on Google to find a screenshot or a photo from a Kickboxer movie. Well, it wouldn't take you that much extra time to find a photo from Kickboxer, the film that you're trying to talk about, and not from a completely different Kickboxer movie. This is what I'm talking about in terms of standards or integrity. Like, and simply just giving a shit about what you do. I mean, don't even have the right fucking photo, and I'm supposed to take this article seriously in any shape or form, and you can't even get the right fucking photo? God, the same shit happens so many times when people talk about RoboCop, and it irritates the fuck out of me every time I see a photo from RoboCop 3 with Robert John Burke, and they use it when they're talking about the first film or the film with Peter Weller. Even my cat's irritated. My cat's had enough of this shit too. It's driving him nuts, driving him up the fucking wall. It's not too much to ask to have the right fucking photo from the right fucking film. For fuck's sake. So he talks about Kickboxer is notoriously bad. I don't know that many publications. I don't know of that many critics. I don't know of that many people, period, who have said that Kickboxer is a so bad it's good film. Most people that I know of just say it's a good movie. It's a good martial arts flick. It's one of Van Damme's best. I don't hear anybody saying it's so bad it's good and it's notoriously bad. I mean, if we're talking about the Kickboxer sequels, okay, I buy that. But I don't buy the first film. And once again, Olympus is just flipping the fuck out, man. Shit. Wonder where I could get some of that energy. Man, I sure could use some of that lately. But anyway, the guy talks about how it is notoriously bad. It was fairly popular. It did do fairly well at the box office, but critics mocked the confusing plot, the dialogue, and the over-the-top violence. The confusing plot. Where are these critics? Who are these critics? Because I would like to kick them in the fucking face. Because there is nothing confusing about Kickboxer. I watched that recently. There's not a single fucking thing about that film that is confusing. If you want to talk about a tone that's inconsistent, that's an argument that I understand and I think you can make. But a confusing plot? No. Not at all. It's confusing that anyone would even mock or say anything about the film for being confusing. And also the way that the guy structured this sentence, it made it seem like he's saying that all of these things are confusing. They mock the confusing plot, dialogue, and over-the-top violence. So mock the confusing dialogue and the confusing over-the-top violence. What is confusing about any of those things? It's absolutely nothing. I'm more confused by this fucking article. Number 23, City Heat. Yeah, that's a pretty bad film. I would agree. I wouldn't say it's one of the worst films I've ever seen. I wouldn't put it on a list of worst, but I would put it on a list of biggest disappointments because of the fact that you've got Clint Eastwood and Burt Reynolds. But a big part of that is because Burt Reynolds broke his jaw shooting the film early on and was never really the same afterwards. So it's kind of hard for me to be that harsh on City Heat. That's why I really wouldn't have the film on a list like this. Also, I wouldn't say it's notoriously bad because it's pretty forgotten about. It's not talked about that much by that many people, except for Clint Eastwood and Burt Reynolds diehard fans. Number 22, Maximum Overdrive. Tired of this film getting shit on, period. It's an absolute blast to watch. It's over the top. It's cocaine-fueled craziness. But that's a big reason why it's so endearing to me. That's why I love it. And I wish more films were like it. Yeah, go for broke. Go fucking insane. Why not? It's a movie about trucks and mechanical things that come to life because of a fucking comet. Why not do it in a way that's over the top and not taking things seriously? Don't have a problem with it. Doesn't have to be somber and scary. Not all Stephen King properties have to be somber and scary. So, talks about how King didn't like it. He said that it failed miserably, and it failed to connect. But here's the thing. This article fails to connect with me once again because Maximum Overdrive is not a fucking action movie. Maximum Overdrive is a horror film. There is some action in it, but I don't see Maximum Overdrive in the action section at a video store. I see it in the horror section. So, once again, just not thinking things through. Oh my god! What? This is just stunningly inept. Because in number 21, the next film is Jumpin' Jack Flash, but the writer uses a photo of Whoopi Goldberg from Ghost! Not an action movie. I don't know how you found a Whoopi Goldberg photo with her character from Ghost when you were searching for Jumpin' Jack Flash. What did you just do? Go on Google and randomly put in Whoopi Goldberg and just throw in the first Google image result that you found? Like, that's the only thing that makes any sense to me. Why you would come to this fucking point and have the photo from Ghost. Ghost? Honestly, I wish that bad writers like this would become ghosts on the internet. Not in real life, but on the internet, which means deceased. They are just apparitions, or they no longer are there to spew this bullshit anymore. Why the fuck do these people even deserve this opportunity to begin with? People talk about the death of media, they talk about the death of print, and they talk about the death of journalism, and I understand why social media has made things very complicated and difficult, but this is in my opinion, probably an even bigger reason for it. Lack of fucking standards. And they're desperate. So desperate to have people to put anything on a site. They just don't even give a fuck who they hire and what these people put on their websites. So yeah, they talk about Jumpin' Jack Flash, which once again is not an action film. So that's another movie on this list of notoriously bad action movies that is not a fucking action film. It's a comedy. It was marketed as a comedy. It has some thriller elements with some spy stuff, but at its heart and at its core, it's a comedy. That's like saying Short Time with Dabney Coleman is an action film. Or saying any comedy that has action in it is an action movie. They say, hey, Stakeout, that's an action film. Jesus. God damn it. Number 20, So Bad It's Good, Hard Ticket to Hawaii. Never seen the film. I know it's notorious for being so bad it's good. So is a lot of those films that just have a bunch of hot chicks and skimpy clothing and have them shoot guns and there's explosions. Alright, okay. Number 19, Red Sonja. Red Sonja had all the elements of a big hit. It had action, fantasy, and big stars. Did it really? Other than Schwarzenegger being in it for like half the film, it didn't really have a ton of big stars. Brigitte Nielsen wasn't a massive megastar at this point. But yeah, it was a major disappointment. Oh wait, it was a major disappoint with fans. Can't even fucking spell. Like just I don't understand the astonishing lack of effort, the fucking apathy from this writer, David Bath. Like, what the fuck, man? Did did you write this while you were taking a bath? When, while you were being fucking electrocuted? Like, what the fuck is this shit? It was a major disappointment with fans. And he constantly, once again, he's saying it failed to connect with fans. He says this so much. And I'm like, fans? What fans? You're using this term a lot for films that don't really have a major fan base. Like, you're even saying in the article, they don't have a lot of fans, or they're not very well liked or well received. And then you talk about fans? How is it going to have fans if you're saying it's not very well received? It's not how fandom works. Number 18, K9. K9? Turner and Hooch got more attention from fans. Did it really? Did it really? Because as far as I'm concerned, which film had 3 movies? Wasn't Turner and Hooch. Which film to me is talked about more when it comes to a film about a police dog? To me, it's not Turner and Hooch. It's K9 with James Belushi. It had better reviews, and it did decently enough in the box office. I don't get that statement at all. And once again, K9 is not a fucking action film anyway. That's like saying that Beethoven is an action movie because there was a car chase at one point in the film. K9. It's a bad film, and it's a bad action movie. It's not a bad film, and it's not a bad action movie because it's not a fucking action film. Number 17, Pink Cadillac. Goes down in history as one of Eastwood's worst action roles. It did poorly with the box office and critics. Okay, I don't really remember Pink Cadillac being strictly an action movie either, so once again, fucking failing here. I mean, what's next? You're gonna have Bronco Billy on the list somewhere? When you throw in a Western by Clint Eastwood that didn't get well received. But even then, that would be more plausible. I would believe that more than some of the films on this list. Number 16, Bad, Red Scorpion. Red Scorpion never had a chance for success before its release. The film had a bunch of delays and it went over budget. The film stirred up a lot of controversy. What controversy? You can't just say something stirred up a lot of controversy and then not say what the controversy is. Because I don't remember the film really stirring up that much controversy. I mean, the film didn't really get much of a wide release at all in the US, if I remember correctly. Oh, actually, it did get a release and it actually made a little bit of a profit. So it's not like it was a massive failure. And saying that it's one of the worst action movies of the 80s is absolutely ridiculous to me. Like, are you fucking kidding me? Especially when it comes to an era where you had so many shitty direct-to-video action films by companies like AIP, like Invasion Force. You're gonna tell me that Red Scorpion is on the same level as shit like that? Get the fuck out of here. When you sit on a grenade launcher. God. And then once again saying it didn't connect with fans. Stop saying that, man. Oh, or the writing, directing, and cast were all a big disappointment. The directing or the writing, like, who is looking at, Red Scorpion, that action movie with Dolph Lundgren. I'm so disappointed in the writing. Then next film is Cobra, says it's so bad it's good. To me, it's fucking awesome. There's nothing bad about Cobra. That film is fucking badass. It's a classic. And there are so many action films today that wish they were half as fucking good as Cobra. So, and yes, it did have some issues with the critics. And it did have some issues with a disappointing box office, which I find interesting because he said that the writer says that it did well in the box office. It did okay. Considering the marketing, considering everything, it didn't do as well as Warner Brothers would have hoped. So, no, it didn't do great in the box office. It follows a basic action movie formula that failed to impress. That's another thing this guy repeats ad nauseum, over and over again. Failed to impress. Well, this entire article is a fucking failure, and it doesn't impress me one bit. If I was given this job to write an article like this, I wouldn't just half-ass it in like 5 to 10 minutes while I'm taking a shit on the toilet. I would actually put some fucking effort into it, and I guarantee I would do an absolutely way better job than this fucking guy. I would at least have the right fucking pictures in the article for the right fucking films. So anyway, yeah, he talks about Cobra, says it's a cult classic, said it didn't impress, didn't connect with fans again. I don't know, I think it connected with a lot of people. It still connects with a lot of people to this day. I'm one of them. But alright. Talks about Cobra. Number 14, Raw Deal. Of course, he opens up with this zinger. Raw Deal was truly a raw deal for fans. Oh man, you're so fucking clever. Give this guy the Pulitzer Prize already. Jesus. Okay, Christ, what a hack. So, talks about Raw Deal. It didn't do that well. And then this really takes a turn to a point where I'm like, is this guy fucking high? Was he high when he wrote this? Or is there something wrong with him? Because he mentions that the purpose of Raw Deal was to add to money to another film production in Total Recall. When the film did poorly, the studio went bankrupt and lost the rights to Total Recall. Where did you fucking get any of this from? Because I've never heard this before. Never heard this once at all. I don't think, and it doesn't make any sense either, that a company would make a movie for the sole purpose for the film, if it made money, to take the profits and put it into another film that they're already putting in production. If they're putting the film in production, that means they already have a budget. That means they already have money they're putting into it. So this makes no fucking sense that this was at all at any point true. Yes, there was a production of Total Recall that I think was by DEG, who might have financed, might have been the ones that financed Raw Deal. And they lost the rights. But that doesn't mean that that's why their version of Total Recall didn't happen. They lost the rights to Total Recall because they ran out of time and the company was in trouble. The company was already in trouble prior to Raw Deal. So this doesn't really make any sense. Talks about a bomb to the box office, failed to connect with fans. Yeah, okay. Raw Deal is not the best film in the world. I'm not even a super big fan of it, but I'm not going to say it's a bad film, and there are much worse action films to me. Number 13, No Retreat, No Surrender. I still haven't seen this one. I've seen clips. From what I've seen, it doesn't seem like one of the worst action films out there, especially from the 80s. So, I don't think it's that bad. Said it was a ripoff of a Karate Kid and Rocky IV. Yeah, that's understandable. There are people who say that the martial arts scenes are some of the best in cinema. Where is this coming from? Just more stuff where I'm like, where? Where is this guy pulling this shit from? Because I just don't get it. I don't understand. Because I've never seen anyone say that No Retreat, No Surrender has some of the best martial arts scenes in cinema. I've never come across one single fucking person who has said that. Number 12, Bad, Iron Eagle. saying it's one of the worst action movies of the 80s. It might be the worst of all time. Really? Really, Iron Eagle is one of the worst action movies of the 80s and one of the worst of all time. What? Iron Eagle? Like, I'm not going to say the action is amazing, but it's decent enough for the time. It's fun. At least it has some good characters and a good soundtrack, and it's got a budget behind it, and City J. Fury did a good job directing it. I don't even think it's that bad, period. I enjoy Iron Eagle. Yeah, it's a Top Gun ripoff, but it's a fun Top Gun ripoff. That's one of the best Top Gun ripoffs out there. Not one of the worst films of the 80s, or of all time. Like, of all time, Iron Eagle is one of the worst action films of all time. This guy hasn't seen very many action films. Seriously. I dare this guy to do a marathon of AIP action movies. Please, go on YouTube. Go on IMDb, search up AIP films. Find their action films from the late 80s and early 90s and watch a ton of them. Back to fucking back. And then sit here and tell me that Iron Eagle is one of the worst action films ever. Because I guarantee you will not say that if you go through with that gauntlet. But you won't, because you either don't have the balls to do it, or you don't really fucking care that much about the action genre. Number 11, bad, Firewalker. I don't think it's bad. I enjoy Firewalker. I think there are better action adventure movies, but I still had fun with the film. Norris was fine. I don't think he failed to impress with the role. That was a knockoff of Indiana Jones, but it was an enjoyable knockoff nonetheless. Number 10, So Bad It's Good, Masters of the Universe. This is one that honestly I agree with. This is like the first time where I'm like, yeah, that is kind of a So Bad It's Good movie. At least for me personally, it's definitely a guilty pleasure. I grew up with it. I didn't really grow up with the cartoons or the toys. I grew up with the movie with Dolph Lundgren. And as an adult, there's a lot of cringe. There's a lot of shit in that film that's not good and does not hold up. But there's other stuff that I like a lot, like Frank Langella's Skeletor. Like, wow, Skeletor is actually intimidating. And he's not a whining little bitch like he is in the cartoons. And there's some nice set pieces, some moments where you could see the budget on the screen, and I can have fun with it. Yeah, it's a really weird mix of Star Wars and other sword and sorcery films, but it's entertaining at least. But Gwildor still sucks and is still annoying as hell and it still has a ton of problems. But and Dolph Lundgren definitely does show how stiff he was at this point, how limited he was as an actor. But as a physical presence, he definitely has it. Can't sit here and say that he doesn't look the part of He-Man. And it also has a really good score. I really love the score by Bill Conti. But yeah, I would say it's a bad film, but I enjoy the movie. So I would say it is a So Bad It's Good film. Number 9, Bad, The Exterminator 2. Once again, he says one of the worst action films of the 80s. Please watch more action films from the 80s. AIP films. Watch some of the lesser rated major studio films. Watch something from Shapiro Glickenhaus Entertainment that's not the Exterminator films. There are so many other 80s action movies that are way, way, way fucking worse than Exterminator 2. In fact, I think Exterminator 2 is honestly a little underrated. It's not a classic. It's not a great film. But I think it's a good movie for what it is, and I actually like it a lot more than the first film. But okay. Exterminator 2. Number 8, Action Jackson. Mentions the Rotten Tomatoes rating. That automatically makes me take the article with even more grains of salt, or just makes me take it even less seriously. because anytime someone is using Rotten Tomatoes to prove a point, well, the point that they proved is that they fucking failed to prove the point. Because Rotten Tomatoes is rotten to the fucking core. It's unreliable and it's total fucking bullshit. And a big reason for this is it's not really accurate. There are so many reviews that are considered to be rotten or positive that if you actually read them, they're not really rotten and they're not necessarily positive. And so they're put into the algorithm and the percentage, and it doesn't really fit. Like, you'll read positive reviews and you're like, they didn't really like this movie. Why is this considered to be a fresh rating? And then there's other films that get all these really good reviews, but then you look deep into it and then you see the studio that released these movies, and then you see who owns Rotten Tomatoes, and you're like, oh, okay, well, this is just a bunch of fucking shilling and lies from the studio to try to prop up their film and try to make it look like it's better than it is to get more people to see it. And what do I mean by that? Warner Brothers owns Rotten Tomatoes. Just think about it. Just think about it for a second. But yeah, Action Jackson. All right, Action Jackson, it's not an amazing film. It has its problems. It did well in the box office. Critics didn't like it. It didn't really do a lot to move Carl Weathers' career forward afterwards, even though it did decently in the box office, which is too bad. Because, I don't think he's really the problem. It's got some decent action, but I do have some problems with the writing and so on, and it is a little derivative at times, but it's a decent enough film. I wouldn't put it on a list of bad action films from this decade. Number 7, The Punisher. Saying that it was a box office bomb is unfair because it never got a theatrical release. How is this film a box office bomb? The studio went bankrupt before the film even hit theaters. It wound up direct-to-video a year later. Or I think it might have been a couple years later. Like, it was not a film that even got a fair shot to begin with to be a box office bomb because it was never fucking released in theaters. Except for very few, and I think only overseas. It didn't get a domestic release in the US, so it wasn't a box office bomb because it never fucking had a release. It was released direct to video. And same was a major disappointment, to each their own. It failed to connect with comic book fans and non-comic book fans. I don't know. And they're talking about the source material and blah, 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 blah. I love how it didn't follow the source material, so it sucks. It followed the source material pretty closely as a Punisher fan, and the only real differences were very minor. And one of them was just the appearance of the Punisher. Oh, just because he didn't put a skull on his chest. It didn't follow the source material at all. That's not really true. And for me personally, I still think Dolph Lundgren's Punisher is the best that I've seen when it comes to Frank Castle on film. I like Thomas Jane. I don't mind his portrayal of Frank Castle, but he just lacks a certain edge, and Dolph Lundgren brought that for me. He was believable in the role. I thought Dolph did a really good job, and I think The Punisher is an underrated film. It's loaded with action, it's super violent, and it's definitely a comic book film. It's got some good direction, some nice style to it, and overall, I mean, it delivers what you want out of a Punisher movie. A really high body count, tons of gunplay and knife play and fights. I mean, Frank takes on not just the mob, but the fucking Yakuza. I mean, I don't understand why the film is as hated as it is. Now, number 6, it's another film I agree with. Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. Saying it's one of the worst films of all time, I don't know. I've seen more films out there that are worse than Superman 4. But it's still pretty bad. I would say it's one of the worst comic book films. But also saying it's an action film is another stretch for me. There's not a whole lot of action in it, and I don't really call the Superman films action movies. At least not the Christopher Reeve films. So I think it's a little bit of a stretch to have it on a list of bad action movies from the 80s. But if you're going to make a list, that one can work for me because of the fact that I'm not going to deny that it sucks. Like, that is a bad film. Number 5, So Bad It's Good, Big Trouble in Little China. Really? Really with this bullshit? I mean, this list is so fucking irritating. I'm starting to lose my voice, folks. It's making me lose my voice. I should probably stop. But I'm almost done, and then I'll stop. But Big Trouble in Little China? Really? So Bad It's Good? What? What is so bad it's good about Big Trouble in Little China? It's tongue-in-cheek, yes. But that's on purpose. And it's done well. And it's really finely crafted by John Carpenter. It's got great performances by Kurt Russell and a whole slew of other cast members. And actors and actresses like Dennis Dunn and Kim Cattrall and James Hong. So Bad It's Good? This film has some of the best blends of wire fu and other elements and other genres that I can think of. It's a film that inspired Raiden from Mortal fucking Kombat. You want to sit here and tell me that Big Trouble in Little China is so bad it's good? Give me a fucking break. How about... I'm just baffled. I'm just speechless. That people are actually trying to say that Big Trouble in Little China is so bad it's good. Saying that they wanted to beat the Golden Child and it was rushed into production. No, they didn't make it to beat the Golden Child. The script was written long before the script for the Golden Child, so I don't know where you're getting that from. And talking about how it did poorly, yeah, it's sad. It did poorly in the box office. It really is sad. But that doesn't mean it's a so bad it's good film, because there were more critics at the time that didn't mind it. They thought it was at least interesting and different. And it's got a lot of fans and it's got a cult following. It's not so bad it's good. That's like saying if you're making a list of horror films and you put They Live on there because, or Prince of Darkness, because they didn't do amazing in the box office. The logic is just killing me. Just like it's killing my voice. Number 4. Bad, Missing in Action. Really? Really? And then once again, one of the worst movies ever made. One of the worst movies ever fucking made. Have you seen shit like Curse of the Blue Lights? Have you seen Blood Voyage from the late 70s? A film where a bunch of people just fucking sleepwalk on a boat for what feels like 4 fucking hours. Have you seen these films? Have you seen Feeders? Or Feeders 2? Or Crash from 1977? I don't think you've seen any of these fucking movies. And it makes sense because you're saying that shit like Missing in Action, the first film, is one of the worst films of all time. Really? Worse than Manos Hands of Fate. Worse than Movie 43. Worse than Uwe Boll movies. Worse than the Scary Movie sequels after Scary Movie 3. Like, Missing in Action. That's really one of the worst films ever. Just stop writing. Do us all a favor and quit. I know this is years old, but just quit, David. Quit. Retire. Number 3, Tango and Cash, and it's listed as bad. Of course, talks about how it was a flop, went through a lot of production problems, mentions the Rotten Tomatoes rating, and then says it's one of the worst action movies of the decade. And I want to fucking hit this guy in the face with every fucking weapon I can think of. How about I take the RV from hell from Tango and Cash and run over his fucking nuts with it? How about that? Jesus fucking Christ. Tango and Cash is one of the worst action films of the decade? How? Even if you don't like the film, I don't think you can actually say with a straight face that it's one of the worst action films of the decade. Because there are some really badass, exciting action set pieces in that film. And I don't fucking care. Tango and Cash to me is a terrific action film. It's one of my favorite action films. In my opinion, it's one of the best buddy cop action movies out there. It's infinitely quotable. It goes by at a breakneck pace. The action is exciting and well done. And for a film that had so many different fucking issues during the production, it's amazing that it turned out as well as it did. So no, Tango and Cash is not a bad action film, let alone one of the worst action movies of the decade. Who wrote this fucking... Did Brian James's character from Tango and Cash write this? That would explain a lot. Fucking limey immigrant jerk off. Sorry, I'm quoting the film. I don't have a problem with immigrants or anything like that. I'm quoting Tango and Cash. Like, you cut my head off and use it as a fucking basketball for all I care. But don't let this guy write it. But okay. Number 2, bad, no holds barred. No argument there. That would probably be on a list if I were to make a list like this of bad 80s action movies. Yeah, it's a movie where Hulk Hogan says Dookie. It's got shitty wrestling scenes, and it's got a really weird tone, and Hulk Hogan's a bad actor, and Tiny Lister isn't really good either. It's a really bad movie. There are some times where I can kind of get a kick out of it for just how stunningly awful it is, but that doesn't mean it's a good film, and it's not even a guilty pleasure for me either, because I don't even really get a ton of enjoyment out of watching it. Like intermittent enjoyment from No Holds Barred. Number 1 is Roadhouse. One of the most famous so bad it's good movies of all time. So bad it's good that it's great. And I don't understand why Roadhouse has this reputation. I don't think it's bad. I've never felt guilty watching the movie. I've never felt it was a so bad it's good film. I've always felt that Roadhouse is a good movie for what it is. It's got some good action. Patrick Swayze is great. Like pretty much everything he was in at the time and was in period, and it goes by quickly. The romance is kind of clunky. I'll give you that. But I don't think it's a bad film. What is so bad about Roadhouse? People say this a lot. Like, it's so bad it's good. What is so bad about Roadhouse, period? The romance is kind of clunky? That it's cheesy and it's over the top and it's not realistic? What, all those things that I love about 80s action movies, and all the things that most people who write about 80s action movies also love about 80s action movies? So if that's the case, then why isn't every over-the-top 80s action movie so bad it's good then? By this logic. I don't get it. Why is Roadhouse considered so bad it's good? Because of Family Guy jokes? Like, I don't understand. So, to sum this all up, I'm going to quote Tango and Cash one last time. This whole thing fucking sucks!